This morning we'll be turning to Psalm 13. Psalm 13, so you can either follow along in the Pew Bibles or follow along on the screen, which we have here this morning. First of all, if you are new to us this morning, I am not the regular pastor. I'm only a congregant here, and the council has allowed me to preach, to practice what I've been taught in the past couple of years. So thank you to the council for allowing me to do this morning. Psalm 13, I will be reading it, but I'm going to try something a little bit different. I wanted to get the feel of what David may be a feeling or been saying at this time. So you will hear the words properly, but kind of more of it as a monologue than anything. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me. Answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. As I did some research into this topic, or into this passage, I found that it was speculated or written that it was possibly the time that David was being chased by Saul, was experiencing quite a bit of turmoil, and probably not feeling a lot of love, to be quite frank or simple. It was a tough time. I thought, well, what do I use to identify this pain, this agony that he's going through? And I started to think about the things as a child. As I was talking to some other pastor friends, they said, yeah, that was an analogy I would use. They said, think of a child that is hurt. And I thought about the time when my oldest daughter, Ashley, had a seizure for the first time. What a scary, helpless feeling. To find your child lying on the floor in a state of contraction and just shaking and not looking at you. And you pick them up and you grab them, and there's nothing you can do except put them back down and call 911. Well, typically that's my job. That's what I do as a career. I am 911. But I don't have my tools with me. And this is not just another patient. This is my daughter. So what do? Well, the worst part is when they start to come out of this seizure, they start to kind of fight and get combative with you. And the harder she punches and the harder she tries to push away and cries and screams, the harder you pull her close to you because of the love. You know what's going on. You know what's happening. I find a similar thing happening here. David splits this up into three different distinct parts, or verses at a time, and he begins through the verses 1 and 2 in a lament. We begin to identify how he is going through this pain, this agony. He's brutally honest with us, and he's brutally honest with God. He doesn't hold back. He cries out, how long? Will you forget me forever? He knows God, but he's stuck here wrestling. He's wrestling with God. He's wrestling with himself. He's wrestling with others. It doesn't seem to get better. When he wrestles with God, like I said, how long will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face? Hide your face was a common metaphor used in the Mesopotamian area at that time. It was something quite of disgrace. It was more than just ignore you. I'm just going to flat out turn away from you. I'm not even going to look at you. That's how much I don't want to hear from you. I want nothing to do with you. I'm completely turning away from you. And this is what David is telling us at this point. God, where are you? Where have you gone? he continues with this pain, this agony, and this brutal honesty. When he wrestles with himself, when he says, "How long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and every day have sorrow in my heart?" We don't know for sure, but we can speculate what he might be going through. He feels like God has left him. He feels like he no longer has his friends. We recognize, or we remember in other passages where even his good friend Jonathan felt like that friendship was getting torn apart. He's supposed to be the king, but he's being chased by the king at this time, who's going after him to literally kill him. You can imagine the agony and the pain, the conflict that he's going through. So it is speculated in this passage that he may have even reached a period of depression. Now, for those of you who have never had to deal with depression or anxiety, I've had plenty of experience, not only in myself, but on other people too, that you talk to them, it is a feeling that you cannot get out of. It's like you're trapped inside of yourself, and no matter what you do, you can't escape. Especially at a time where they didn't have medication or psychiatric help or anything else. What's he doing but trying to run away? God, even you have left me, or as he feels at this time. So he's struggling with God, he's struggling with himself, and now even the others. How long will my enemy triumph over me? His enemies are after him. The king who used to be his friend is after him. He's done nothing but good for Saul. How long is this going to continue? So when I titled this Grace in Grief, I said, how do I show the grace in this? All I see is lament after lament and crying out, "God, what are you doing?" What's interesting, though, is I just mentioned the struggle with self, with God, with others. Listen to this a minute. Matthew 26:37 through 38. He, or Jesus, began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, his disciples, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." This is the time he's in Gethsemane, and he's praying with his disciples, or, as if you remember correctly, maybe praying more by himself, because his disciples, his good friends, his confidants, were falling asleep. Matthew 26 continues to show that, how Jesus' disciples are falling asleep. But not only that, they leave him after he's arrested. They just flee, scatter, run away. And later on, not only do they betray him, they deny him. His closest friends, his closest confidants, his closest people, the people he could trust with anything, are also doing the same thing that David is saying. He's lost his friends. He's having trouble with himself. And then, if we remember in Matthew 22, when Jesus quotes David in Psalm 22, in Matthew 27, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." My God, why have you forsaken me? So how could we say there's grace in verses 1 and 2? When we lament or we cry out to our God, do you think that he doesn't know what we're feeling? Do you think that he hasn't also experienced the struggles with self, with God, with others? But what's the response to that? Well, if we continue on through verses 3 and 4, we look at Saul's petition. He proceeds with a threefold petition, because despite each feeling, David reminds us that every part of this complex life is intimately tied together with Christ. And the first part answers that very well. "Look on me and answer, Lord, my God." He doesn't say, "Look on me and answer, Lord, the God," or "Lord, a God." My God. Already, despite this trouble that he's going through, he identifies this relationship, this intimate relationship that he has with his God, with our God. And he says, "My God, look on me," as a response to his pain in verse 1. Stop hiding your face from me. Stop ignoring me. Is there not grace in that? When Ashley's sitting there in my arms trembling and coming out of the seizures fighting me, I'm holding her closer. Where she seems to be saying, leave me alone, but she doesn't know what's going on at the time. We see this. David still realizes there is still a God. There is still my God in this. He continues with his petition, answer me. Give light to my eyes and give me strength. David proceeds with this, with his reasoning behind his petition also. For he says, look on me, help me, or I shall die. What is worse, if I shall die, how will your name be exalted? Mine enemies will boast. My foes will rejoice. David had already been promised that he was going to be the next king. And so David pleads at this time, God, if I die, your prophecy, what you said, is not going to come true. How is this supposed to happen? In the same thing, Jesus prayed much the same. When he prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. But he also adds to that, yet not as I will, but you will. Interesting. Jesus had also been asked to be relieved of his pain and suffering, but he realized that God had a greater plan. You see, God's plan, or God's love, extends through grace to save us by the blood of Jesus Christ. For David prayed, I shall die, my enemies will boast, and my foes will rejoice, but I still have peace, that I know that you have a plan. This may not make sense to me, or make sense in my head, or make sense in what's going on. And I'm still going to ask for help in this, but I can have peace and trust in your grace. So he concludes in the last two verses in praise, where he says, and I love how he starts, but I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices forever. My heart rejoices in your salvation. What's also interesting, I'll note, especially in the NIV version, it says, I trust. In some other versions, you'll see, I trusted. But I like to point out that it's more, I think it's important to point out, it says, I trust. He continues to trust. This was not a period that I trusted. This is a continually process that despite what is happening with him, this trust continues. My heart rejoices in your salvation, and I will sing to the Lord. Notice the irony that is happening here. He begins the first part by calling out, lamenting, crying out, being brutally honest, and saying, God, what have you done? Where are you? Why have you left me? Almost just throwing it right back in his face. For those of you who have teenagers, I can only relate to what I've done to my parents. Have they ever said to you, why do you do this to me? Why do you hate me? Why can't you love me? Why this? Why that? I'm sure it tears your hearts apart. But at the same time, you only stick to your guns even stronger because you know this is what I need to do to raise them right. But they have a relationship with their parents so strong that they could throw whatever at them and the parents will have to take it and still love them. The same thing is happening here. David has such a relationship by grace that he's able to lament and throw anything right back at God and say, I don't understand. What's going on? He then continues with, all right, I don't get it. So Lord, I need you. I need your grace because I cannot do this without you. And finally, he concludes it all, as I mentioned, with the last two verses. I trust in you. As Martin Luther wrote in his exposition of the psalm, the agony and the ecstasy belong together as a secret of our identity. In other words, we see that God is with us through every part of life. He has a part in everything that happens. You see, without the agony, we won't need God. Why would we? Everything's going well. It's too comfortable. I got this. I can take care of it. But God allows us to be reminded of his grace time and time again, because without God's grace, we could not find ecstasy. For you see, we are all sinners. We're unable to experience the ecstasy and the peace that we find without God. So it is with our lives. We may experience times of pain and tribulation, times when we need to lament to our God, but at the same time we're able to praise Him because we're also reminded of our relationship with Him because of His grace. It is by grace alone that we're able to celebrate this love, this relationship that we have with Him. And it is by grace alone that we are called to Him and able to worship Him freely this morning. With that, let us turn to Him in prayer.